Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again. This is the first webinar of OntoCommons. We are broadcasting from Pisa, and together with me today there are my colleagues Luigi Colucci and Rita Giuffrida from Trust IT Services, as well as Silvana Muncella from Trust IT, which is also a panelist today in one of our sessions. Today, let me go quickly through our agenda. We'll have, first of all, a session with Nadia Adamovic, Senior Scientist at the Technical University of Vienna and also OntoCommons Project Coordinator. And right after, Hedy Carey will present how OntoCommons will build an existing solution in a global settings. OntoCommons is Hedy's professor at ENIF and also the OntoCommons Technical Coordinator. And we also have Gerard Goldberg, founder and CEO at Goldberg Consulting Ltd, who will present a session about building the OntoCommons community and the focus group. And Jan Lefranc, CEO and Scientist Director of eScience Data Factory, will present the FAIR Ontologies. Finally, Michela Magas, Chair of the Industry Common Foundation, will present the innovation in OntoCommons to create an industry commons. We will end up our webinar with a Q&A session. And please feel free, of course, to raise your hand should you have any question. But there will be also a dedicated session. For the questions, you can use the questions panel or the chat panel as well. I think we can already start with Nadia. So Nadia, if you can already share your screen. Or sorry, if you can activate your microphone and yeah, okay. So welcome, Nadia, and I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Christina. I would like to welcome all participants to this webinar, also from my side. I will talk about the Ontology Commons ecosystems, the major aims and goals. My presentation will include the main project features of the project, some words about the vision, objectives, Ontology Commons ecosystem, some words about the project structure, expected impact, and the major project results. Next slide. The project OntoCommons has the title Ontology-Driven Data Documentation for Industry Commons. It's a Horizon 2020 project. It was submitted within the NMBP work program. The topic of under the topic towards standardized documentation of data through taxonomies and ontologies, and this is coordination and support action type of project. The project has started in November 2020. This is a 3-year project with a total budget of about 4 million euros. I'm the project coordinator and Hedy Carey is a technical project coordinator. The next slide. The project consortium is composed of 19 project partners, 15 research institutions and 4 companies coming from 10 different countries. You see logos of involved project partners. Next slide. The consortium of involved institution is presented here. So these are core people who contribute to OntoCommons project. And we already started some months ago a very fruitful collaboration within this project. Next slide. So I start to give an overview on the major project goals. So this is really overarching goal of OntoCommons CSA project. It's to coordinate and support overcoming of interoperability bottlenecks and to facilitate data sharing and valorization. The next slide. So there are several objectives that will contribute to this major goal, which I just mentioned. First of all, it will be to build the community quite a lot of resources within this project is really devoted to this type of activities, because this is a CSA project, and we will establish a two-way communication with stakeholders. On one side, we will cooperate with existing initiatives in Europe and on international level as well. And on other side, we will engage the stakeholders to work with us in the project. What does it mean, engagement? Engagement means that we will have a number of wide stakeholder consultation events. This can be in a type of large workshops or potentially online surveys where we will discuss relevant topics. We will discuss the barriers, the bottlenecks in the field of data documentation. Then we will digest this feedback in a form of a number of strategic documents, and of course disseminate to the wider community as well. The second objective, and one of the major objectives of the project, is to develop OntoCommons ecosystem as foundation for data documentation. More about the ecosystem I will explain on the following slide. And the third objective is to develop a number of demonstrators that will prove the effectiveness of the OntoCommons ecosystem. I say a number. We have initially defined 11 different industrial demonstrators. Within the project and through the execution of the project, we plan to have 10 additional demonstrators. And in addition to that, we have a number of European projects that have already devoted resources to development of demonstrators, and some of them will be in addition integrated to OntoCommons. This system will provide ontologies, tools, and also data samples from these demonstrators that we will work on within OntoCommons. Next slide. Here I will briefly present what the OntoCommons ecosystem is composed of. More in detail, we will hear in the follow-up presentations. First of all, it will contain a set of ontologies with different level of generality, from the top level until the application level. Not every ontology will be a part of Ontology Commons ecosystem. Which ontologies will be a part will be defined with specifications and requirements that these ontologies need to fulfill. For this system, it's very specific and very good, I would say, a very important quality of the project, that we didn't from the beginning on confine ourselves on one pre-selected top-level ontology, but we have a pluralistic approach, and there are several top-level ontologies which are a part of this system. Which additional and potentially additional top-level ontologies will constitute this system will be agreed within wide stakeholder consultations in the upcoming events of OntoCommons. So in the following weeks and months, we have a set of several workshops where we invite a large number of stakeholders, and we will have the opportunity to discuss with European and international stakeholders all these questions. So the system will be composed on one side on ontologies, but on another side also on state-of-the-art tools which have to be compatible, of course, with a pre-selected set of ontologies. And these tools will be used to develop ontologies, but also for standardized data documentation that will follow FAIR principles within OntoCommons. Next slide. Here you see the project structure, and it is obvious that this structure also follows the objectives which I just previously described. We have one work package which is devoted to community development, to the cooperation and engagement. And I have to say that, of course, on the beginning of the project, we already had a full list and we already performed the mapping of relevant initiatives for our project, but this will be ongoing effort, and of course any additional relevant initiative or project will be mapped and added to the list of projects or collaborators of OntoCommons. We will also engage these stakeholders, like I mentioned, in discussions with us in order really to perform the wide consultations and to come up to agreements with the larger community. So the second part of the project is devoted to ontology ecosystem development. On one side, we have ecosystem design that will include definition of requirements and specifications for the tools that will be a part of the system. Here we will work with state-of-the-art solutions. As being a CSA, we will not have that much development effort within this project, but we will try to use what is already existing and developed. And then we will have ontologies where some development will be performed, in particular within the top level ontologies on the alignment, on the harmonization between different pre-selected top level ontologies, and also on the domain level. We will have harmonization of existing ontologies, but in some domains where ontologies do not exist, we will have also some development in this field as well. Which new ontologies on the domain level are going to be developed depend on the additional demonstration cases that we intend to integrate throughout the execution of the project. Next slide. To sum up, here it's a kind of specifics and conclusions regarding the OntoCommons project. The project works or demonstrators within the project are coming from different domains which are covered by an NMBP work program, like requested in the call topic. This will include materials and manufacturing and processing, but not only. We have a number of other user cases covering also some other domains as well. We will involve different stakeholders coming from domain experts, like for instance, material scientists, ontologists, implementers, or for instance, software developers, industrial stakeholders, end users, business developers. OntoCommons will enable intra and cross-domain interoperability. More about it will be presented in the follow-up presentation. Then different type of, different level of interoperability will be achieved between different ontologies, but more about it we will hear later. The project will harmonize data documentation, and not only that, the harmonization between ontologies will be done. In addition, we will deliver a number of demonstration cases which will be used for dissemination purposes, and a sample of data will be used also after the project end for demonstration purposes and for potentially other industrial stakeholders that will use the same system. And we will ensure the sustainability of the project after the end of the project. Next slide. Some comments regarding the major expected impacts. The project will work on standardized data documentation within the same domains and between different domains that will meet fair data principles. It will allow user-friendly reusability of data across domains. It will support developing of different ontologies, also the maintenance of ontology development and data documentation, will facilitate uptake of new project results through the collaboration with several marketplace projects, in particular with data marketplace. Next comment. It will improve ability to build interoperable software solutions. The standardized data documentation is machine understandable, and this will support semantic interoperability and will in this way also support the interoperable software tools, and will support integrated development environment in Europe and on the international level as well. When we remove these barriers which we have today regarding the data sharing between different domains, of course, this will enable better integration and better synergy between different domains. Next slide. With this slide, I will also conclude. These are major results of the project. First of all, we will develop a methodological framework for ontology development and documentation. We will work on the development of the ontology ecosystem composed of a set of ontologies and tools for the development of ontologies and data documentation. We will validate the same system with a number of demonstrators, which you see on the right side. This is just the initial list of first 11 demonstrators. I just said that throughout the project, we will enlarge the number of demonstrators. We will organize a number of large workshops, online surveys, webinars, meetings to discuss with a wider community in Europe and on the international level as well. We will discuss different relevant topics on the data documentation, on development of ontologies, on the harmonization between ontologies. We will discuss about the barriers and gaps which we have today, and propose also actions in order to remove these barriers in future. We will build the community, OntoCommons community, and work on a number of strategic reports which will be made public available. A number of them is planned to be available for the wider community. And as a crown of the of all of these activities, we will have OntoCommons roadmap that will practically overarch all topics which we cover within OntoCommons project. So with this slide, I would like to conclude my talk and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for the nice presentation and overview of the project. And now we will move on with the next two speakers. We have Hadi Carey, which I mentioned before, is Associate Professor of Informatics at the National School of Engineers at TARB, ENIT. And we have Silvana Muscella, CEO and founder of Trust IT Services. So Hadi is also the technical manager in OntoCommons, and Silvana is the dissemination and communications manager. They will now guide us through the presentation on the existing solutions which OntoCommons is building on, and we'll see what is already available in the global settings. Okay, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. So, yes, so I will start my presentation by summarizing some reasons for ontology failure and for ontologies to get traction in industry. So there is a lot of, let's say, available ontologies in the industrial domain, but and also there is a series of initiatives related to ontologies since more than 20 years, but they didn't not gain traction until today and fails to drive interoperability, let's say interdomain, intra-domain, and cross-bodies interoperability. So there is, let's say, a kind of skepticism in many circles in industry related to ontologies. And the problem that we point out through the state of the art that there is too many ontologies developed, but most of them, they are built in ad hoc ways, and most of the ontologies developed doesn't have common methodologies or using ontology engineering methodologies. So there is a lot of wrong reuse strategy that make those ontologies not interoperable. So ontologies are presented as a valuable solution for interoperability, but the main problem that ontologies are not interoperable. And this is due to different aspects from the state of the art. We can mention the poor documentation of ontologies, the different perspective of ontologies, and also the short life of ontologies, because they are not sustainable, they are not updated, they are not well documented. So one of the objectives of OntoCommons is to have answer to those reasons by developing the OntoCommons ecosystem. So in OntoCommons, we try to develop a network of ontology or an ontology hierarchy started from top-level ontology. And this level of what we call top reference ontology will enable a common foundation for data interoperability between top-level ontologies and lower-level ontologies. So the top reference ontology in OntoCommons will consist of a meta-ontology and a set of selected top-level ontologies like basic formal ontology, Dolce, Emo, and other ontologies that will be selected with the contribution of stakeholders in next, let's say, OntoCommons workshops. So the meta-ontology will be developed by OntoCommons and will be the foundation for interoperability between available state-of-the-art. So the state-of-the-art top-level ontologies that will be also discussed and proposed by stakeholders. Next slide, please. So in OntoCommons, we try to harmonize existing ontologies through top-level, through the top reference ontology and a multi-level alignment. So in OntoCommons, we will focus on 4 levels of alignments. First one is the syntactic one. It's more focused on the languages used in the development of ontologies. So this will be part of the ecosystem. Then the terminological alignment, which will enable a minimum taxonomical interoperability between ontologies, which means that the possibility to have hybrid taxonomies and by passing sub-branches of one ontology into another ontology. So as said by Nadia in the presentation, OntoCommons adopt a pluralistic approach, which means that in the same domain we can have different ontologies coming or developed under different top-level ontologies. So there is a level of interoperability to ensure at the terminological level, and also a semantic alignment that will be developed under the same branch of top-level ontology. So the semantic alignment will target the alignment of ontologies in the same top-level ontology branch. And then the last level of alignment is formatting, which is include labeling of classes, the definition of terms, the annotations used to describe classes of the ontologies. Next slide, please. So in OntoCommons, there is two kinds, let's say, of interoperability: the intra-ontology interoperability, which means that we ensure and data interoperability between ontologies under the same branch of top-level ontology. So there is a hierarchy from the top-level, mid-level, domain, and application ontologies, and the idea is to ensure the interoperability on those different levels of ontologies. Next slide, please. So the other kind of interoperability is based on the harmonization, which means that we try to have a hybrid approach based on top-down alignment to top reference ontology and bottom-up focus on domain specifications in order to have cross-domain interaction and create a bridge of alignment between domain ontologies. So under this pluralistic approach, the idea is to enable data sharing in the same domain, even if we are using different domain ontologies coming from different top-level ontologies. So this will be ensured through the use of the top reference ontology that will be developed in OntoCommons. The next slide, please. So to conclude, OntoCommons will be based on the state of the art of top-level ontologies, and will try to ensure alignment between levels of ontologies intra the same top-level ontology, and also cross-domain using a top reference ontology that will be developed into the project through the different levels of alignment between ontologies from the syntactic, terminological, formatting, and semantic levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hedy. And now over to you, Silvana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. And thank you, Hedy, and everyone. Nice to be with you this afternoon. So I just wanted to back up, if you like, with a few slides, if we go on to the next one already, with what Hedy's already just said, in terms of enabling interoperability through sharing terminology and proposing ontologies. Maybe I should have put the title as Ontology Interoperability. And I just wanted to say a few slides on what we're trying to do as part of OntoCommons.eu in the activity around a task dedicated to ICT standardization and ontologies. So we want to see this project as a basis for developing a landscape analysis to assess exactly what ICT standardization efforts are going on in ontologies and what we're doing within the project, but then that can be nicely wrapped into the OntoCommons.eu roadmap that Nadia mentioned at the beginning of her presentation, which is one of the biggest, which is one of the assets that on the OntoCommons project will deliver as a lasting legacy. Next slide. So how are we going to build this in a global setting? So we want to put together this landscape analysis that will support the roadmap, but we also are contributing already to working groups within standardization efforts, and I list here already the ones we know are working around ontologies. The idea is also to create and cooperate with the IEEE to create a dedicated industry commons group, and we have a very active external advisory group with experts on standardization and ontologies and partners who are also on the call here that work around this. We want to map international standardization initiatives regarding data documentation based on ontologies and taxonomies in any of the NMBP related domains. And part of this presentation is linked also to efforts that can be fed into the Stand ICT project, where we can feed whatever results come out of the OntoCommons, hopefully into the multi-stakeholder platform that work on ICT standardization, and any results can then go into the subsequent rolling plan of ICT standardization under development for 2021. Next slide. In terms of the synergies as well, OntoCommons has a number of related cooperations. Nadia mentioned the demonstrators, the industrial demonstrators at the beginning of the presentation. We want to see how many of these could also become valid EOSC in practice use cases, which is something that was going to be developed under 2021. Define and foster the role of an industry commons translator. Work together with the Research Data Alliance to elaborate recommendations for standardized data documentation and contribute to fair data and fair ontologies, which Jan will be talking about in the next presentation. So we've already started these discussions, and we're already making headway, which is extremely positive. This week is the launch of a EOS, which is the European Observatory for ICT Standardization, and there are areas within this observatory where OntoCommons can play a role, and which we're already working on. So the idea is to actually put together a working group on ontologies within the EOS, which feeds into the different standardization bodies, where this discussion forum can indicate and put together within the working group a short sprinted document that covers the landscape analysis of what's going on. So this can also be put forward to policymakers in the future and will help populate our roadmap. Again, we want to have a dialogue with the MSP. So anyone interested in being part of a working group for ontologies, then please do contact us after the webinar. And to conclude my presentation, we have one of the objectives of Stand ICT is to deliver and provide financial support to all experts working on different topics for ICT standardization. There are 10 open calls, €3 million available, and so we can try and capitalize on cross-cutting synergies between projects, especially under Horizon 2020 or other framework programs. We invite everyone who is working or has effort on ICT standardization to apply. And if you can see here, this is the list of the open call. They're not all of them there. I did a screenshot because I wanted to clearly zoom in on the part which we have included ontologies as part of a topic. So do send us your applications, because this will contribute to make sure that our roadmap is fully in line with whatever efforts you're doing with whatever standardization working group or other. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Silvana. And we will now move on to the next speaker, which is Gerard Goldberg from Goldberg Consulting. He's a modeling and digitalization consultancy, and he's also executive secretary of the European Material Modeling Link Council, which, and I didn't mention before, also the president is Nadia Adamovich, our first speaker. So I leave the floor to you, Gerhard, and Gerhard will talk about the OntoCommons focus group and the OntoCommons community.
Thank you, Christina. And what I'm now going to do is really just pick up on some of the points that have already been made by the previous speakers and put that into the context of the different stakeholders of OntoCommons and really hope to convince you to get involved as hopefully one of these stakeholders in different focus groups that OntoCommons is going to run. So as we've already seen, there's a whole spectrum of stakeholders and expertise involved in this system and in building OntoCommons. That goes on the left-hand side from the domain experts via the ontologists, then the implementers of that in a sort of data science perspective, and then obviously industrial stakeholders, and then cross-domain developers and entrepreneurs and investors, which are really on the business ecosystem. And then really it's multi-dimensional because, sorry, if we can just stay on that slide a sec, because in each of these, for each of these, there are obviously different expertise levels again, and different domains involved. For example, on the left, as we've heard, we go from materials to manufacturing, and then even beyond that to supply chains, life cycles, and so on. And then also, obviously, in terms of industries, we cover all of the relevant industries then that represent these materials. And the ontologist side, for example, we bring together the different people representing, for example, the top-level ontologies, mid-level ontologies, but also logicians, philosophers, and semantic web experts. And then underpinning that, and Savannah talked about that and others, about the standardization, which is really important across a number of fields. So hopefully within that kind of multidimensional grid, you can find yourself and really be involved. And yeah, next slide, please. Because these areas are basically mapped onto focus groups, which are there to build the community, to get involvement for industrial domain ontologies, and then top reference ontology, but that includes also, as I said, further involvement of, for example, mid-level, top-level, all of the things in terms of the harmonization, etc., that Hedy mentioned. Then building the OntoCommons ecosystem toolkit, and being involved in demonstrators as an industry stakeholder, but also from various businesses, etc., in demonstration, and then underpinning that, again, cooperation on many aspects, in particular standardization aspects, and also infrastructures such as European Open Science Cloud, etc. So next slide. Yeah, just a few words about each of them. I mean, we have now become already a bit familiar with these different areas. We're covering all of the domains and are about the harmonization, and also looking where there are gaps. You see this cloud with the different colored dots, and there are interactions and some also missing gaps in that landscape of domain ontologies, and we are also about identifying those and seeing what new development can be initiated. I would like to draw in particular your attention at a forthcoming workshop, which is on domain ontologies for research data management in Industrial Commons of Materials and Manufacturing. And that workshop is organized in the context of the European Semantic Web Conference on the 7th of June, but we were also going to run an online discussion and workshop to prepare that on the 15th of March. And please go to the link and submit your contributions. And go on, please. Yeah, so then the top reference ontologies, again, I'm not going to go into the details again that have been discussed by Hedy, what this is about. It's about these foundations that are so important then to support the the domain ontologies in a semantic and interoperable way. And again, here I want to draw your attention to a workshop that we're going to run in April on top-level ontologies and mid-level ontologies, and do get in touch via the website, via contacts, if you're interested in that. And next slide, then we come to the Ontology Commons Ecosystem Toolkit, OCES, which is about the specification and guidelines for the support of ontology development and its maintenance, usage, documentation. So these are really the things that help the stakeholders that you saw in the center to bring everything together and make it usable. And so maintaining a state-of-the-art toolkit out of existing systems and services is what this group is about, and brings together, I think, what we recognize as quite a disparate and heterogeneous set of powerful tools into a more powerful package in a way for the whole community. And please again get involved here. Next one. Demonstrators have been mentioned, and I'll list them out here again. So this is where really we see how things work, and also where the gaps are. We're really proud to have such a fantastic range of initial demonstrators that are in so many different domains and involve really a number of leading industrial organizations and research organizations that we are already starting with. But again, as Nadia also said, we are going to involve more of you, more of the community, in at least 10 more demonstrators, and also a number of running projects in demonstrators. So this is obviously again a great opportunity if you're more interested in the demonstration aspect of that, and if you have any particular demonstration goals, this is the group to be involved in. Next, please. So the cooperation, obviously the whole project is about cooperation, but really what we're looking at is about, first of all, synergies. There are so many initiatives already running, industry commons projects, associations, standardization bodies, and infrastructures. And so we want to ensure that the interests of their stakeholder groups are represented and carried over in terms of recommendations, roadmaps, and requirements as part of the OntoCommons activities. And the cooperation is then also, as Nadia mentioned, finally about building and developing the OntoCommons roadmap. There are two groups in particular that we're going to focus on in terms of the community involvement, and that is about standardization and infrastructures. Next, please. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you. And again, please get involved. You will hear later about how to do that and how to sign up on the website and get involved with the OntoCommons project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. And indeed, yes, on the website, we will find all the necessary information about the workshop. Now let's move on to the next speaker, and let's learn more about fair ontologies. Frank. Ian is a data management solution. Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining this webinar. I'm going to talk about a topic on fair ontologies, which relates to what Eddie was saying previously about the problem of ontology not being interoperable, and also relating to the presentation of Silvana one of the goals of the OntoCommons is to relate with existing initiatives and leverage what exists already instead of reinventing the wheel. Next slide. So just briefly, fair ontologies. So let's start with a clear and simple definition of what is fair. Fair is coming out from a long-lasting discussions in different domains, and was published actually in 2016. And they are proposing guiding principles for data management and data stewardship that will help to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And since the inception of these concepts, there's been a lot of interest from the science community, of course, but also various organizations. And FAIR principles are also at the core of the development of the European Open Science Cloud. And for more details on the FAIR principles, I would like to invite you to the link that I put there that is proposed by GoFair, or to read the paper. Next slide, please. Next slide. Christina.
Yes, slide.
So can you go back one slide now, please? So FAIR is at the core of OntoCommons. And so I'm going to just explain two different aspects where we are working on integrating these FAIR principles. First, I'm leading a task within the project, OntoCommons, that aims at linking with existing FAIR initiatives and FAIR projects like FAIR is FAIR, FAIR Sharing, GoFair, and various working group and interest group within the Research Data Alliance that actually deals with implementing FAIR principles. And the overall idea of the task is to actually leverage the existing guidelines to implement the FAIR principles in industrial data workflows. And that goes from FAIR Ontologies, which is the topic of my short presentation, but also will apply to the OntoCommons use cases and demonstrator to help them to make their data fair. The overall idea is that we can leverage these existing guidelines, and then we can also contribute back to these efforts by being additional use cases. Another aspect, which is now related to the FAIR Ontology side, is one of the tasks in the project try to make a landscape analysis of domain-specific ontologies to actually assess the diversity that Eddie mentioned in his previous presentation. And one of the ideas is to evaluate the level of fairness of the existing ontologies that we will actually discover in material science, manufacturing, and other related domains. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do we evaluate this, the fairness of ontologies? And the idea is to leverage some work that is being done in the FAIR is FAIR project, which are called FAIR Semantics recommendations. And these recommendations have been developed with the contribution of a community of experts from various domains in science throughout brainstorming sessions and various workshops that led to actually documents that propose 17 general recommendations and 10 best practices for making ontology fair. These recommendations are aligned with existing community-specific recommendations that already exist, like the OBO Foundry for the biomedical domain, but also with the Industry Ontology Foundry that propose some principles for developing the ontologies. And these recommendations went through a second iteration. So there is a new version that came out in January with an alignment of the current recommendations with the recommendation RFC 2119 that actually allows to discriminate the recommendations that should be mandatory from those that should be optional. And actually, I put the link on in the presentation. Now, the work that is going to happen in this project is that they are going to work on building a practical framework for the implementation of these recommendations that have been accepted by a large group of experts, and to use these recommendations for fairness assessment. So our contribution will be to use and leverage these recommendations integrate these recommendations within the project OntoCommons, and to actually give them feedback on the industry side. Next slide, please. So this is open for comments. So if you're an ontologist or if you're interested in contributing, here I'm putting the link to the GitHub repo where you can actually provide your comments. And on the slides, there are different labels that are used to understand the comments and classify them. So you can refer to that slide later on if you want to contribute. Next slide, please. So now, why do we work on fair ontologies? It's because first, ontologies and vocabularies, and in the fair semantics work, it's called semantic artifact, which encompass a much broader number of semantic artifacts, because they are first-class citizen in fair implementation. They do contribute strongly to the interoperability of data, so to the I, and it relates to the principle I2, which states that metadata and data needs to use or must use vocabulary that are themselves fair. So it's a really important topic in the implementation of fair principles. Also, one of the reasons that was already mentioned by Eddie is like a lot of ontologies are building ad hoc, while semantic web technologies were developed to break data silos. The fact that we are all ontologists are working separately with different ways of working makes the current practice to create what we could call semantic silos, which makes things difficult to work with what exists already. Now, by applying these fair recommendations, by increasing the fairness of these ontologies, that will then enable the creation of a harmonized semantic space that will ease the creation of use case-driven ontologies by reusing existing ontologies, but also ease the integration with mid-level or top-level ontologies that were discussed by Eddie. It will also help getting tools that are a bit more general, not tools that are only focused on specific aspects and can only cover specific formats for the ontologies. So it will improve the capabilities and the interoperabilities of the existing toolings, and then enable cross-domain interoperability to foster innovation. So if you have any questions, next slide, please, about fair semantics and how we're going to use it in OntoCommons, please do not hesitate to contact me. I dropped my email on the last slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Ian, for the nice presentation. And now it's the turn of Michela Magas that will present the innovations in OntoCommons towards the creation of an industry commons. Michela is the chair of the Industry Commons Foundation, and in OntoCommons, she's also the Innovation and Sustainability Manager. Over to you, Michela. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And it's lovely to see so many different stakeholders participating in this webinar. I can see people, familiar names from standardization and from innovation and from ontology research. So it demonstrates just how many different stakeholders are actually interested in this topic and how important it is across different sort of disciplines. Could we go to the next slide, please? So this is a really great starting point as far as innovation is concerned. So what OntoCommons can do for innovation is actually huge. Even if OntoCommons moves a small way towards a harmonized space of reference documentation and translation mechanisms, it will actually unleash a huge impact. This is just one use case, which is from manufacturing processes, particularly in optimization of manufacturing processes. Is the rise in data sharing is estimated to be $100 billion value, and this is according to the World Economic Forum white paper, which was published a year ago. And even in that use case, it's not just one aspect, but it's a whole series of aspects. So all kinds of optimization, so assets optimization or optimization of production processes, but also tracking of the full product life cycle, of the conditions, of provenance, which can also help with procurement, which can also help with collaboration across domains or between industries. So this is just one huge case study, but it's one case study and there are more. Could we have next slide, please? So Industry Commons is fostering any mechanism and standard that is allowing this sharing of data, reuse of knowledge across industrial domains, particularly also with cross-domain exchanges, with hybrid applications that can result from those cross-domain exchanges, with identifying the business value at the junction between these different domains. And also it allows, when it's an integrated and fully trackable, traceable space, to test early adoption and to track emerging market scenarios, which is really unprecedented. This is something that previously required particular focus and investment into specific areas that were identified by stakeholders. Here, it's actually trackable and traceable in the entire ecosystem. Next slide, please. So when we work with innovation and when we work across industries, our experience shows that the most frequent bottlenecks that are being identified are the lack of interoperability. So of course, this relates particularly to semantic data and, for instance, to lack of standards and metadata, especially between different domains. But the other bottlenecks that are usually identified when working in sandboxes across different industries are also actually related to interoperability, or interoperability can make a difference here. So not enough data is always the case with frontier technologies such as AI, neural network training, machine learning, and proprietary IP is another really major bottleneck, especially when it comes to industrial marketplaces or any innovation applications that require release of proprietary data. And use cases are unpredictable. This is something that is prohibitive when it comes to figuring out how to invest in a particular sandbox, in a particular test case. So what we have often found is very good results of porting data from a low risk sector to a high risk sector. So this can actually result in saving some basically savings and also more streamlining and more efficiencies, but also it can actually be the other way around. It can be actually something that's assumed to work well in another scenario that actually turns out that it doesn't, and this could also be the result of semantic interoperability challenges. So next slide, please. So what OCES does, the OntoCommons ecosystem, is a very intelligent approach to this. It doesn't try to create an Esperanto. It doesn't try to harmonize everything. Obviously, it looks at application level and the value of the different domains having their own application language, their own knowledge graphs. But when it comes to the top level, it looks at creating a documentation that can be used as reference and also translation mechanisms. So it's a sustainable approach to ontologies, and this becomes the foundational enabling mechanism for an industry commons because it enables reuse of data, valorization, of course, collaborative innovation as a result of that, and also more agile value chain interactions. Next slide, please. So here's where we see how the OCES interoperability affects those bottlenecks mentioned earlier for innovation. It inevitably results in an increase of data exchanges, so more data use and reuse, increase in data value. So one can start to configure various ways to valorize data, and particularly when it comes to marketplaces, there can be various different strategies on how to valorize data. An increase in use cases, of course, results in greater number of successful applications or lessons learned that can be ported over to the next use cases, which is what's going to happen with OntoCommons, hopefully with the lessons learned from the first set of 11 demonstrators, which will then be, some of those learnings will be ported over into innovation in the second set of demonstrators, which are still to be identified and defined. Next slide, please. So the contribution to cross-domain innovation is not only in incremental innovation, as we have seen in the examples from the optimization of manufacturing processes. It's also in the breakthrough innovation, which happens at the junction between verticals, so unlocking of data value. This is, as I mentioned before, there are various different issues with portability of data. There are ways to track emerging scenarios. There's ways to increase efficiency and to reduce cost, as mentioned earlier. And open innovation has a massive potential in this new space that's being enabled because, of course, with a shared semantic basis, we can have this standardized data documentation as a reference point. The collaborative innovation is then really becomes possible across domains, which means that we can identify new business models and new emerging market scenarios at those junctions. Next slide, please. So OntoCommons actually ensures a complete value chain for exploitation of innovation. So it's not only top down, it's not only setting up the top reference and then actually trickling that down to application cases. It's actually looking at also industrial application perspective and feeding that information back into the value chain. It looks at best practice opportunities for innovation from demonstrators, as I have mentioned. It also has dedicated workshops for identifying emerging market scenarios and novel cross-domain applications, which will help us identify what are the next 10 demonstrators that need to be tested. Of course, we have in parallel DOME 4.0, which is running, which is the Industry Commons Marketplace, which has been funded. It started on December 1st with some of the partners who are shared with the OntoCommons project. And of course, the OntoCommons results are being tested in DOME 4.0. And it's very important that we build sustainability of the results and long-term legacy, because we're really in it for the long term. So next slide, please. So at the Industry Commons Foundation, we are tasked with ensuring this long-term sustainability. And of course, the main aim is to broaden the community. Currently, we are very strong in materials modeling and in manufacturing. And we really wish to extend to other domains, but we also want to align with any interoperability developments that are happening, that are coming from other domains. So that effectively what happens is that all of the standards or all the reference documentation becomes a staple of a wider industry commons ecosystem. Next slide, please. So this is the final sort of goal and objective, I would say, for everybody who's participating in this webinar, because basically beyond the core user community where OntoCommons is coming from the materials modeling and from manufacturing, we expand with a system that is then accessible by developers, entrepreneurs, and investors that can be used in data markets, in digital innovation hubs, and in sandboxes. That means that it will stimulate innovation at a grand level and with a multiplier effect, because of course the more of this capabilities are unleashed, the more potential for novel applications and for both incremental and breakthrough innovation, and for open innovation in general. And that means that we can actually move towards a European common data market, as I would call it. So I think that sort of wraps things up. I was trying to be as short as possible because I realized that we had run a little bit out of time. But if you have any questions, I think we have now 10 minutes or so for questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed, Michela, thank you. We do have a question and answer session now, and I see we are already having some questions in the chat. Let me just... So the question is, how do the working groups work on ontologies, and what will be expected from the people who join it? Maybe Nadia, you would like to
answer. We will have several focused areas which were briefly also presented by Gerhard in his presentation. We would like really to involve all relevant initiatives in Europe and stakeholders to join our community, depending on their interest, to join different focused areas or working groups, like you called it now. Some of them are devoted to development of ontologies, on the top level ontology and middle level ontology. And also there is one focused area which is devoted to development of domain ontologies. Typically, what we expect external stakeholders, it is basically to collaborate with us. We would like to engage stakeholders in workshops, in discussions with consortium. We would like to discuss all relevant then topics on the development of ontologies, on the harmonization of ontologies, on barriers, gaps in the field, and basically what we intend to do is to discuss together and to propose or to recommend actions for the future in order to remove these barriers as much as possible within the project. So typically, what is the involvement? It is to participate in workshops, to discuss with other participants and to contribute with own expertise and vision what we really need to do in the field in future.
Thank you, Nadia. And we also have a question from Luis Ramos, who I see, Luis, you were also raising your hand. I'm activating your microphone in case you want to comment anything, but I will also read your question, which is, hi, what logics and languages are going to be supported in this framework?
Hi, Luis. So I try to provide some answers for your question. So mainly we start with all ontologies, but it will be open. I mean that it's open for discussion with the whole community. So in OntoCommons, as Nadia said, it's a CAC project. So discussions will be driven by partners of the project, but also from the input of stakeholders. So this is part of the ecosystem and toolkit of ontology, OntoCommons ecosystem. So for languages, it will be OWL, to start with OWL language and description logics, but it's open for other languages. So it's a question to discuss into the workshops with different stakeholders, with language developers, and what we reach, what we let's say what we target is to reach an agreement on languages and logics to be used for ontologies.
Thank you, Hedy, for answering this question. We also have a comment from Domenico. He's a little bit skeptical about the possibility of merging effectively three different top-level ontologies, Dolce, BFO, and MO. And he comments, I'd rather go for choosing one of them.
Yeah, thank you, Domenico, for this question also. So, I mean, we were discussed this question since, let's say, since IOF, the Industrial Ontology Foundry, when it's started. And the idea of OntoCommons is not to merge those ontologies. I mean, it's not only the three different top-level ontologies, Dolce, BFO, and EMO. It's the first set of ontologies. It can be more. And it's not a question of merging those ontologies because they are different. EMO is 4D ontology, BFO is 3D, for example. So we can't align them semantically. But what we target is at least have terminological alignment between those ontologies. Even if we can't reach semantic alignment between those ontologies, but I'm agree with you that it's not an easy task, and maybe it's really difficult and impossible to do some semantic alignment between those ontologies. What we target is to ensure at least terminological alignment between those ontologies.
Thank you, Hedy. We have a couple more questions. Is there a defined criteria to decide when using existing ontologies and when creating new ones?
Okay, so it will be also discussed with the community. In the 15th of March, we will have a workshop on domain ontologies, and this question will be one of the questions to be discussed in the community with stakeholders in order to define those criteria, and it will be the same for the top level and mid-level ontologies.
Thank you. What about the tools? Will VocBank 3 be developed further and protégé? Shall I repeat the question? We have a question from Frank about the tools. He is asking if VocBank 3 will be developed further and also about protégé tool.
So in OntoCommons, there is no development for tools. So what we will do is the landscape of tools on ontology development, ontology visualization, so on methodologies. So all those existing tools will be discussed, analyzed with stakeholders in order to identify gaps and to have the roadmap on tools in order to answer stakeholders' needs. So there is protégé. Main stakeholders of tools will be invited in the workshops with the end users in order to make the bridge between those communities in order to identify the gaps, to make the landscape, and also to provide the roadmap on ontology tooling.
Thank you, Hedy. I'm trying to, we are having quite a lot of questions in the chat, so I try to address them in order. How can you contribute and collaborate? Well, I let maybe Nadia or Michele answer this question, or Gerard, but I'm also sharing the link to our workshop in the chat for your benefit.
We will have the opportunity for external stakeholders to become a member of OntoCommons community. This will be possible very soon, and through the website you will be able to join the community and to express the interest to contribute then to specific activities within the project.
Yes, I can just add, it's mainly, yes, as Nadia said, and we really have, as you already heard, workshops already organized, and over the course of the project, really a very significant number of expert meetings, workshops, and kind of conferences. So basically meaning very small get-together on very specific topics to let's say fields such as domain ontologies, to some what we call horizontal workshops, which really cover everything. And so within that, there should be multiple opportunities to contribute and collaborate, and then get in touch and interact with the relevant people to obviously set up more specific interactions as required.
Thank you, Gerard. So there are some comments from Roberto. I've seen some of them have been addressed by Hedy already. Thank you, Hedy, for answering in the chat. And I think there was also a question.
Yeah. I mean, on the again, please get in touch with us in terms of the top-level ontologies. We are, considering the ones amongst the significant large number of those ontologies that are relevant. We are aware of the National Digital Twin survey, which has been a very great help to us as well already in terms of looking at what is out there. So many thanks again for that, and we're very happy to continue and deepen the collaboration also with that project and National Digital Twin and other projects that basically work along similar lines.
Thank you, Gerard. So I'm reading a question which I think can be useful for everybody about the invitations. Will I automatically get invitations if I'm on the mailing list? So I would also recommend to register to our newsletter, because we will also send out information before any event. And of course, if you are in the single focus group, you should receive also the invitations for the events. But that depends on the single focus group and on the event you would like to participate. So I see there are really lots of questions and comments in the chat. Of course, now we should wrap up because the webinar is it's already 4:15 and we don't want to run late. But of course, if there are other questions, please feel free to address them via the contact form, and we can address them via email. I will try to read a couple more questions. What safeguards are there to prevent bias or unfair advantage for any particular existing foundational ontology? For example, some presenters may have a preference for a particular ontology located outside of the EU, and naturally there should not be a bias for something outside of the EU. This is a question from Roberto.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I didn't get all the question.
Or people may have a preference for an ontology located outside of the EU.
Yeah, it's not related. I mean, OntoCommons is open for stakeholders from Europe, but also international stakeholders. So it's, I mean, that it's open for all ontologies over the world. So it's not a question of the nationality of the ontology. It's the main objective is to have this landscape on the top level, mid-level, and domain level ontologies, and to work together. I mean, that to make people to work together on ontology development and make agreement on the methodologies, the tools, and the specification, the requirements, and to have agreement on ontology development, and to try to reach alignment between ontologies developed under different top-level ontologies. So this is, I mean, that our approach is to have this pluralistic approach, which means that we can have different ontologies in the same domain. And our work is to have bridges between those ontologies. So we are really open, and we expect to collaborate with all initiatives on ontology development in order to have a cooperation. And I mean, it's enough that people develop ontologies in their own working groups. Let's do it together. Let's align our efforts in order to get standardized ontologies and to allow interoperability between ontologies.
Thank you again, Hedy. Okay, I think we can wrap up. There is a last question about where will the terminological alignment of the ontologies can be accessed, if there is any GitHub repository. So maybe this can be useful also for everybody. But if you have any other question, of course, feel free to contact us via the contact form on the website. And I suggest you also to join our channels on Twitter and LinkedIn, and register to our newsletter, which is where we will communicate the main events happening. So unless, if anybody would like to answer these last question, then we can wrap up and about the terminological alignment and how it can be accessed.
So David, I mean, the project is started since a few months, so activities are running, and the alignment is not already done. So It will start by a workshop in April for top-level ontology. So I invite you to participate to this workshop, and it will be available and shared for sure. So it will be developed, during the project. So until now, there is no alignment available between those ontologies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, also for your comments and questions and for the participation, the very active participation. We apologize if there is any question that we weren't able to address directly today, but we will be available, and also we will share the webinar recording and the slides, where you have also the contacts where you can find us and come back to us if you have any other question. Thank you again for participating. Thank you to all the speakers today and for the great presentations. And we wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.